So this is teaching critical thinking as preparation for the edTPA assessment. So in the workshops that I took through Pearson, I realized that the first 8 rubrics require lots of description, but from rubrics 9 to the end, critical thinking is required. And my goodness, Lori was studying critical thinking. So here on this slide, you see the description of the session that Jason just read. And we looked at what type of thinking the edTPA rubrics require. Again, description, critical thinking, and the entire assessment requires good writing skills. So as Lori and I talked, we said, do our students have the writing skills that they need? And it was really interesting to hear Linda Susky mention exactly the same thing. So here's our step-by-step guide to the innovation. So when you get this PowerPoint and the recording of the presentation, this will be important to you. So first of all, we started the innovation, and we were totally remote on Zoom, doing a kitchen archaeology activity in which we asked our teacher candidates to bring in one artifact that describes them, and in small breakout groups, we had them introduce their artifact, and we had the other students in the breakout group write 1 to 2 pages about that person using inference as a skill. Then Lori came in and taught the tenets of critical thinking. They studied the Facione and Facione holistic critical thinking rubric, which she'll talk about. We gave them a writing prompt, and we actually rated the writing prompt. I rated the writing prompt, and working in small groups, we actually had our teacher candidates study the rubric in depth. And this was actually a precursor to looking at edTPA rubrics. So we wanted them to learn about what a rubric is, how we standardize a rubric, how we write and use that rubric, and how we use critical thinking. Then we had them respond to a new prompt, a different prompt, and we took a look at how they did at that point. And then we introduced the edTPA rubrics with all of that in mind. So now they were looking at the edTPA rubrics with a different lens. They were looking at those rubrics, having studied a rubric, having written to a rubric, having rated writing assignments themselves, and now understanding a little better how they need to respond to the edTPA rubrics. Now I'm going to skip through this really quickly, this next part, because you know this, but it's exactly something that the speaker just said, that Linda Susky just said. We need to align what we do to INTASC, CAPE, New Jersey Professional Standards for Teachers, and we did that. But again, I've got that all here on these slides. All the alignments are right here, but we don't need to spend much time at all going through this. So you have those, and here's the alignment of INTASC and CAPE, which we all know, and then edTPA, and here's again an alignment chart that shows you edTPA and the other standards. Here's a description of the kitchen archaeology activity, which you can take a look at later. And now Lori's going to begin by describing the tenets of critical thinking. So Lori, when you want me to, I'll move the slide down, just say next slide.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to talk with you about how we taught the tenets of critical thinking. Next slide. So the tenets of critical thinking that we talked about actually comes from the Delphi group, critical thinking experts that were put together by Facione, Dr. Facione, and they came up with 6 core critical thinking skills that we worked with the students to learn and to understand. So the first critical thinking skill that the group came up with was interpretation. So we worked with the students to understand what they need to do in order to teach kids, or what kids need to be able to do to show that they are able to interpret well. And first would be that they are able to categorize information, that they can decode significance, and that they can clarify meaning. So basically with clarifying meaning, that would mean that they're able to paraphrase or make explicit their thoughts or wording through stipulation, description, analogy, or figurative expression that they can contextualize. They can use meaning or use words and meaning or to gain meaning through perhaps maybe numbers or signs or charts or graphs, that they can then bring that information into their writing and be able to display that they're able to interpret well. The next critical thinking skill is we need for our students to be able to analyze, that they can examine ideas, that they can identify arguments that the writer or may have been trying to get across, and then that they're able to analyze those arguments. And so the students had an opportunity to do that. Thank you for that. Next slide. And then the next skill was to evaluate. This is key, that the students should be able to assess we should be, and they should be able to do for themselves, is to assess the quality or the credibility of their statements or other representations, which are accounts or descriptions of a person's perception, experience, situation, judgment, belief, or opinion. And so we work with the students in understanding what that would be as well. Next slide. Inferences, that's another core skill. And these again are sub-skills or evidence that students are able to make inference. Are they able to query the evidence with respect to conjecturing of their alternatives? Are they able to recognize premises which require support and to formulate a strategy for seeking and gathering information, which may need support as well? So are they able to do that? Next slide. Then we talked about and learned about explanation. The evidence that students need to show that they can explain well is that they need to be able to state the results, justify the procedures, present their arguments. So are they able to give evidence of a particular argument? Are they able to support that argument with details or with evidence? So that would be an explanation. Next slide. The last core skill that the Delphi group came up with was self-regulation. So this is really about metacognition, and this is about reflection. And we know in teaching and learning that as teachers, as educators, we need to always go back and think about the quality of our lesson. Did we reach the students that we needed to reach? Is there something that we can do better? These are all of the things that come under self-regulation or self-correction and metacognition. So we made sure that we built into the methods course many opportunities for the students to then go back and to reflect on their work, on their writing, on their teaching decisions, on their lesson plans. So that was also built into this course as well. Next slide. So after teaching that, we also spent a little bit of time talking about what the ideal critical thinker is able to do. So when the students, when you find evidence of those particular skills and sub-skills, then that means that we're building characteristics of a really solid critical thinker, that they're habitually inquisitive, that they're well-informed, they're trustful of reason, open-minded, flexible, fair-minded in evaluation, honest in facing personal biases. And I think the keynote speaker who began our session ended talking about the importance of us being able to do that and the impact it can have on society, hopefully for the better. And the next slide also gives some more examples of what happens when we build the critical thinking mind. That students now are more prudent in their judgments. They're more willing to reconsider what they thought was the correct answer or what they thought the right position was. That they're clear about the issues, they're orderly in complex matters, that they're diligent in seeking relevant information. They're reasonable in the selection of their criteria, they're focused, in their inquiry, and of course, they're persistent in seeking results, which are as precise as the subject and circumstances of inquiry permit. Next slide. So once we did all of that background building and having them think about those things and work with some things, next we move them to, okay, so now it's time to see if we can work with them in being able to analyze for the 6 different course critical thinking skills. And we put into play the holistic critical thinking scoring rubric. And as you can see, it's kind of small. You can't really see it all that great, unfortunately, but you could look it up. It's the HCTSR. This was a rubric. It's a holistic rubric. It was developed by Facione, and he's the critical thinking expert that brought all of the other 46 experts together in the Delphi group. He developed this as a tool to use to evaluate evidence of critical thinking or the development of critical thinking. You can use this for writing. It can also be used for group presentations, which our presenter also talked about, right? So students working together on a presentation, this could be something that could be used to evaluate or to assess the development of critical thinking in the presentation or writing. So the students had an opportunity to work with this particular rubric to assess some writing samples that we were able to do. So next slide. Does anybody have any questions or takeaways from what we've shown you already about the core critical thinking skills, sub-skills, or the use of the holistic rubric? Any thoughts or comments before we move on? Okay. Next slide. So now, Dr. Sherman is going to talk with you a little bit about edTPA.
So we needed to tie all of this together and realize that this was a thread now that we built into the methods course from the very beginning of the course. So as we taught, we focused on assessment. And again, that's something that teacher education programs probably need a lot more focus on. So we introduced them to the edTPA rubrics. And after they learned to read and use the holistic critical thinking rubric, they started to examine the edTPA rubrics. And I gave them the choices document, making good choices document. We looked at the rubrics. And for this particular presentation, we're just going to look at rubric 11. And we picked rubric 11 because in one of the workshops that I attended, given by Pearson, one of the presenters said this is a very difficult rubric for students to navigate. So we thought, oh, okay, let's give this one a little bit more focus. So here's rubric 11, and it's analysis of student learning. So we were wondering if when our students, our teacher candidates, look at the work that their children are producing, how are they looking at it? Are they providing examples of what the students did right as well as what the students did wrong? And actually, when they read the rubric, we wanted them to see the ands and the ors in the rubric, right? So they would understand what the rubric was asking, and then they would use the rubric to analyze their own student work samples. So this is just, again, we wanted this presentation to have 2 parts, one part for you to do right here today, but some of it that you can bring back with you and read more carefully. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to read all this dense text, but basically we copied this right out of the Pearson documents, and we cited them right at the bottom of the slide. So this is what the Analyzing Student Learning Pearson document tells you to do, tells you how to analyze. And they want you to obviously align the assessment with the central focus of the lesson. And a lot of times we found that our students had a hard time figuring out what the central focus of their lesson was. Remember, these were students in methods courses. And then how to align the assessment with that was also difficult. In addition, we wanted them to use diagnostic, formative and summative assessments, formal and informal assessments, and that's a whole lot to learn as well while you're in a methods course. So we wove that in. And we wanted them to look at student thinking, right? Because they are expected to analyze their students' thinking and learning. So learning themselves what critical thinking is about helps them understand how to analyze their own students' critical thinking. And Lori did quite a number of interviews with the students who participated in the course. But in addition to that, I've received multiple unsolicited comments from the students in the course. One particularly actually tweeted out, "I never would have passed edTPA if I hadn't had these lessons in your course." And another one who sent me a beautiful email said, "I use everything that we learned in this course to help my students, my children, learn how to think." So those were pretty good comments. So basically now, we wanted to look at the evaluation criteria. And again, we're working with our own pre-service teachers who are then going to work with their own children. We wanted them to also think about how they should choose the student work samples of their focus students. So that was another aspect that we felt was strengthened by this particular intervention, that they could actually look at student work samples, analyze them. And then here's the part with rubric 11 that can be very tricky. They want you to analyze the whole class data, review the patterns of learning that you found, choose 3 work samples from focus students that illustrate identified patterns from your analysis, choose work samples that are representative of the whole class, and show the range of performance on the assessment so that you can point to the specific examples of the understandings, misunderstandings, and patterns of errors that you discuss in the whole class analysis. Now, no wonder student teachers have a hard time with rubric 11, because look at all of the critical thinking skills that are required just to answer this one prompt, just to complete this one rubric. And we spend virtually an entire semester learning the skills necessary for this. So we wanted to show you, we want to bring you into the classroom, and we have some time. So we wanted to show you a practical example of what we did. So we're going to show you the pigeons and puppies activity problem, which is a math problem. We want you to assume that it relates to the central focus of the lesson, which the particular lesson we taught actually this semester in my math methods course was concepts of algebra and elementary math, solving the activity in groups. So that's what the teacher candidates did. And how will they use their knowledge of critical thinking to respond to rubric 11? So this is basically an activity, and this little snippet shows you how we worked with rubric 11. So we're going to show you the whole class assignment that we gave all of the students, the rubric that they used to score the assignment. Now understand that rubric 11 is a rubric in itself, but when our students wrote their lesson plans and taught them, there were samples of student work produced. So they use a different rubric to score the assignment and to rate their own samples of student work that gave them practice with edTPA rubric 11. And following all of this, Lori's going to give you a summary of what we learned about the intervention from the interviews with the teacher candidates, which I think you're going to find very interesting. It's telling, probably could probably be generalized to more than just our teacher preparation program. So here's our pigeons and puppies problem. And again, we present this to our teacher candidates, this time in a math methods course, last semester in a science, social studies, in the arts methods course. So our prompt was different. It was related to those disciplines. But here's what we did this semester. Zhao, who lives in New York, is a lover of homing pigeons. She also trains seeing-eyed dogs. When I spoke to her recently, she told me in her quirky way that she was currently hosting 36 heads and 80 feet. I was left to figure out how many puppies and pigeons she had. Can you help me? So let's just take a look at our rubric All right, so this is the rubric that is used by the teacher candidate to score her students' work samples. And we're going to just break them down. So here's the rubric. You can see it a little bit more closely, and it rates the students as a novice, an apprentice, a practitioner, or an expert. And here's Chelsea's. This is Chelsea's sample of student work. There are 44 pigeons and 36 dogs. I put 80 minus 36 equals 44. So now our teacher candidates in the methods courses were asked to go into their small groups and look at Chelsea's work and rate Chelsea's work with the rubric that the teacher candidate used. The next sample is Ryan, and Ryan is 10 years old, and you've got Ryan's sample of student work right there. Next, we have Chris, who's age 8, and this is Chris's sample of student work. Next, we have Stephanie, and this is how Stephanie solves the problem. And then finally, we have Lawson, who solves the problem in a different way. And one of the things that we teach in the math methods course is that students need multiple representations. We need to show them different strategies, different methodologies, and different ways of thinking. So these 5 particular student work samples, and this we attribute to the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, show lots of different ways, lots of different strategies and ways in which students solve the problems. Here's another one. So here's a class who is age 11. So now, Lori, we're going to go back. Let me just do this part, then we're going to go back to Lori. So this intervention can be included in any methods course, and it's particularly helpful in the first semester of clinical practice, although this semester we're implementing it in the junior practicum. Teacher candidates were interviewed in the methods course both before and after the intervention. Some were interviewed during the second semester of clinical practice. So Lori, would you like to talk about what we found?
Sure. This was so exciting to us because prior to even beginning with the students in the critical thinking intervention, we did sort of a background information check just to see what they knew about critical thinking, or what they knew about how to evaluate it, how to analyze it. And we found that many of the students didn't have a definition for critical thinking. They maybe could name one skill, but didn't know how to necessarily evaluate it for it. Then they also mentioned that one of the questions that we asked was, had you had any, has anyone taught you about critical thinking? And many of them said no. It was something that they just, I don't know, people tell them to do, teachers tell them to do, but don't necessarily show them how to do it, or to show them what to do, for example, to find it in their own writing or in their own work. So once we did the pre-interview, we followed up with a post-interview, and these were some of the feedback that we actually got, which I thought was very interesting. One student said, "I just want to thank you for coming in and doing this with us, because you brought up a really important issue that we need to address more in our classrooms as far as critical thinking goes." So a huge part of our role as teachers is to challenge our students' thinking. And I just wanted to say thank you for helping us find new ways. As you see on this slide, some of the students, one student said, "I guess what everyone else is saying, really our exposure and practice with the rubric, like what we did in this course, we were further exposed to critical thinking in this course when other professors would just say, okay, you need to use critical thinking or on a rubric. No one said, okay, this is what critical thinking is." Another student said, "I agree that critical thinking just needs to be implemented better by some of our professors, but then they don't follow through with it, or they don't make it as important as other things." Another student said, I think that critical thinking needs to be added to the program. All I hear is professors encourage us to do more critical thinking. I think we emphasize that now, and I just think we need to do more of what we preach and kind of incorporate more instruction across the classes for it, like make more practice time in our assignments and such. Another student said, I definitely think critical thinking is something that's always implied in our other methods courses, but it's not really explicitly addressed. It's kind of hidden underneath everything else that we're doing, especially in math. Like our math methods course, I think critical thinking would have been super helpful to be focused on, at least for like a day or even like half of the class of one class period. So that was pretty telling about the experience that they gained from explicitly learning about critical thinking, learning how to use a rubric. As I said, that the holistic rubric, the HCTSR, was really the foundation that got them ready for all of the edTPA rubrics that they're going to come across and any other rubric that they may come across later on, really looking at that rubric and being able to evaluate students' work, and then learning how to adjust their lesson planning to meet the needs of their students, both whether they're working on grade level, above grade level, or below. It's pretty fascinating. And the fact that they had such a great experience that they wanted it included in a math methods course, because we did this particular study in a social studies, science, and arts course. And so now they're talking about implementing it in math, which is why we're doing it again this semester in the math course. So we're looking to see how what they gain from it. So next slide. At the as Dr. Sherman mentioned, unsolicited, she had a couple of students who already passed edTPA, and they emailed her, which I was just so happy to see. I was like, yes, this is terrific. One student wrote in an email to her, as I approach my semester of student teaching, I wanted to take the time to thank you for a great semester. Not only did I learn to craft meaningful lesson plans in our class subject fields, but also I learned how to better challenge my students' thinking and hone their critical thinking skills. I will not forget the lessons of our class. Another student emailed, thank you so much, Dr. Sherman. The unit plan project you designed for our class last semester undoubtedly contributed to my success in edTPA. Thanks for everything. So we're hoping that this is something that we can integrate in other courses that we do with students, because it's helpful with these students. We're sure that it will help with students moving forward. And then in turn, they can help their students in the classroom.
I just want to jump in, about 2-minute warning.
And we just wanted to thank you for attending our session. That was right on time.
Oh, we really practiced well, didn't we?
We did. Are there any questions or comments?
Feel free to put any questions in the Q&A or the chat, or if you would like to ask your question, you just click the blue button up in the upper right corner to share your audio and video.
And if there's anything that you can think about later on that comes to mind, feel free to email us. My name is Lori Gerald, and I'm at geraldl@rider.edu is my email there. And then Dr. Sherman is ssherman@rider.edu.
So does anybody have any thoughts they'd like to share or anything they'd like to ask us? Okay.